This offseason, we have seen Ryan Zimmerman, Kyle Seager, and Buster Posey all retire, removing three of the last players in the league that had spent their entire career with one franchise. On today's show, I'm going to discuss this trend in the game and whether Jacob deGrom can be one of those players that actually makes it to the finish line playing with one team his entire career. And if it's not deGrom, who will it be? We'll discuss all of that on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Locked On Mets is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing about the Mets at justbaseball.com, where I actually just wrote a piece about Ryan Zimmerman retiring and how the game is really changing when it comes to the franchise player. Because this offseason, we've seen a lot of these guys retire. It was first Buster Posey, which was the most shocking retirement because he proved that he was still a top 5 catcher in baseball this past season, was an all-star, came off a great year, decided to go out on top and finish his career all with one team, all with the Giants. Then it was Kyle Seager, another shock because he still had some juice left. He was going to be maybe the second best free agent third baseman on the market. There were some who wanted the Mets to sign Kyle Seager, but he chose to retire after hitting 35 home runs, which put to end a 11-year career with the Seattle Mariners. He's going to be a Mariners Hall of Famer. He won't be a Hall of Famer, but that is the significance of playing your entire career with one franchise. Kyle Seager goes down in top 5 in most offensive categories in Mariners history, behind guys like Ken Griffey Jr. and Edgar Martinez. His legacy gets cemented so much more because he stayed with one club. Then most recently, you have Mr. National, Ryan Zimmerman, someone we all watched a ton throughout his career, obviously playing against the Mets in the same division for all those years, a 16-season career. It's crazy to me if you go back in time a decade ago when Zimmerman was dealing with all those injuries, and David Wright at the time was this model of clean health. He would always play, 140, 150 games. We thought Zimmerman's career was going to get cut short due to injury, and he was the one that got to stick around, got to win a World Series, gets a better ending than David Wright, which is unfortunate if you're a Mets fan, but it is still great to see a player like Zimmerman spend his entire career with one team. And when you look around baseball, it's just not happening anymore. And that's what I was exploring in this article I wrote for Just Baseball. This is a dying breed of player. We're not seeing it as much because you have a team like the Red Sox who has a player like Mookie Betts. Why would you want Mookie Betts to play for another team? It makes no sense. You look at their books this offseason. I was actually just doing a Carlos Correa free agent profile for Just Baseball as well. And I was exploring the Red Sox as a team that could sign Correa. And you look at their books right now, JD Martinez going to come off soon. They got a pretty clean books. In the future, they could have kept Betts, but they didn't. And that's just showing the way that the game is going to go right now. Teams are looking at players with a year or two left, and they want to extract value because everyone is looking towards younger players, looking towards the Alex Verdugos of the world, who they got in the Betts trade as a more valuable player because they are cheaper and under that team control. And then when Verdugo is close to hitting free agency, who knows? The Red Sox might flip him. But it's crazy that a team like the Red Sox, one of the biggest market teams, a team that can have a huge payroll, wouldn't hang on to him. And yet that's the way the game is going. You see other players like Bryce Harper. I mean, in the past, if you go 30 years ago, a franchise would do everything in their power to retain a Bryce Harper for his entire career, yet he goes to a division rival. So it's just crazy to see where the game's going. And also, you have free agents right now like Freddie Freeman and Clayton Kershaw, who are Hall of Famers, And there's a chance they won't be playing for their respective teams next year. Kershaw, there's all these rumors linking him to the Rangers. For Freeman, it's the Dodgers. There is still a good chance that those teams will re-sign their franchise icons, but we just don't know. And that is the crazy thing about where the game's going. There's only 13 active players who have spent at least 10 seasons with only one team. And that list could get a lot shorter by the end of this season. So you got Yadier Molina. I say Yadier Molina. You got Yachty. You got Adam Wainwright. Both of them are set to retire after this season. They're going to ride off into the sunset together. Great story. Awesome to see. But that'll take two more away when it comes to players that have spent their entire career with one team. You have Clayton Kershaw, Kenley Jansen, Brett Gardner, and Freddie Freeman. They're all free agents right now. And you have Brandon Belt, who is set to become a free agent next year. So there's a chance that all of those players could sign with different teams. Now, I still think Belt likely remains with the Giants. That's a franchise that likes to keep their own. I got to appreciate that. So maybe he sticks around. Brett Gardner could retire or play. It feels like he's always been someone that wants to stay with the Yankees. So we'll see what happens there. I already mentioned Kershaw and Freeman and Kenley Jansen right in that same book, right? A Hall of Fame type pitcher who could leave the Dodgers. And a lot of reports indicate that he likely will leave the Dodgers because they might not be the team willing to give him that massive contract that he deserves. So you go from there. What happens if all those players end up on different teams or end up retiring? You're left with Joey Votto, who's close to retirement himself, only has a couple years left. You got Charlie Blackmon, same boat, a player that's really declined, but might finish his career at the Rockies unless they move him to offload his salary at some point. You have Mike Trout. I mean, if the Angels ever let him go, what are they doing? But he could be, one of the last ones to do it. You have Brandon Crawford, Jose Altuve, and Xander Bogaerts. That's the list. Now, there's other players like Jacob deGrom, who we'll talk about in a little bit, who are getting close to a decade with the same team. But it is crazy to think that we could get to a point where player movement is so rampant that we don't have these stalwarts that stay with the franchise for their entire career. And for me, that's just it's something that I don't want to see, because the game of baseball, I feel like, has really embraced that more than some other sports, where you have these guys like a Cal Ripken Jr., who is the face of the Orioles for 2 decades. Derek Jeter, another example. Guys who would spend their entire career with one team. And now, as we see Zimmerman, Seager, Posey all exit, you see Molina and Wainwright soon to exit. You just wonder how many more players are going to stick it out with their team. And hopefully, as a Mets fan, Jacob deGrom will be one of those last guys that can go wire to wire with one franchise, get drafted by the Mets, and retire with the Mets. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. What is it going to take to make that happen? First, this is the time of year where I think a lot of us sort of give up on our New Year's resolutions, right? We're coming down to the end of February. New Year's was now a couple months ago. But for me, it's been so much easier to stick to my resolution to eat better, because I have Built Bar as part of my diet. It almost doesn't even feel like a resolution when you're eating Built Bars, because I enjoy them that much. They taste that good. They have the new puffs, which are the first ever protein infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy. They're not just a protein bar, they're a treat. They come covered in 100% real chocolate. If you don't want the puffs, you've got so many amazing flavors of the traditional Built Bars, like mint brownie, coconut almond, and new this month, the white chocolate cookies and cream, which is rivaling the regular cookies and cream for my new favorite. They're all delicious, and all the new flavors are coming out all the time. So if you think a flavor might be good, they're going to make it for you. Make sure you go to built.com and see what's coming out new. And once you're there, make sure you use the promo code LOCK15. You're going to get 15% off your next order. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. But why endure that pointless or seemingly awkward questioning where the person behind the counter is clearly just looking up the parts on their computer, trying to order it from their warehouse using the only brand that warehouse carries, when you can just go to rockauto.com on your computer or your mobile device and save up to 30%, 50%, maybe even 100% more for the exact same amount of parts that that guy's going to search for on his computer. Rock Auto is a family business that's been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Their prices are reliably low for every customer. So go explore their easy-to-use website today and find the solution to your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now. When you see all the parts available for your car or truck, make sure you write Locked On in there. How'd you hear about us box? So they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliable low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Locked On MLB Prospect should be your second listen, as host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going to go deep on all of the MLB stars of tomorrow. You can find Locked On MLB Prospects wherever you get podcasts. So let's get back to this conversation here when it comes to Jacob deGrom, who has a chance to be that next Met that can do it, that can go wire to wire. David Wright was the last one, and unfortunately, the end of his career was marred by injuries and ruined what was potentially a Hall of Fame career. He was on that track through the first 7 years of his career. Obviously, the spinal stenosis and the other nagging injuries really did take a hit to what was going to be a career that would have been remembered a little bit differently. I still believe David Wright is a Mets Hall of Famer, no doubt about it. I believe number 5 will be retired very soon, but there's a chance here that Jacob deGrom can go down as one of, if not the greatest Met of all time. Maybe not passing Tom Seaver, but who knows? I mean, that's still a distinct possibility, which would seem blasphemous years ago or at any point in history, because Tom Seaver is the franchise and means so much to the franchise as that player that put the team on the map. But Jacob deGrom, let's just say he stays with the Mets for another 7 seasons, and the Mets win a couple of World Series. His career could look really impressive when it's all said and done. But to get to that point, the Mets have to retain him. And I know that he just signed a contract extension. It feels like yesterday, but we're really staring down the barrel of a point where Jacob deGrom could no longer be a Met. He has an opt-out after this upcoming season. Now, his contract for 2023 will be $30.5 million. If deGrom is healthy, he's opting out of that contract. It would be negligible not to do so, because you look at what Max Scherzer just got from this franchise. Why would Jacob deGrom not want to test the open waters and try to get a similar contract from this team? He can go right to Steve Cohen and say, hey, you paid Scherzer X. I need to get paid the exact same or better over a longer term deal because I'm just as good as Max Scherzer. And if you get to that point, who knows what happens? And if the Mets aren't the team to give deGrom that contract, there's going to be a long list of teams that are willing to sign Jacob deGrom to a contract that's suitable to his talent. So that is concerning. Now, let's just say it's not exercised. He ends up having another injury-plagued year. He decides to opt into his contract. Then the Mets have a team option for $32.5 million. Who knows, though? deGrom isn't the same guy. Maybe after next season, the Mets are the team that doesn't want to entertain, accepting that club option. And in that case, would deGrom be insulted to the point that he would look for another team anyway? That is where we're at here. And it's why in a podcast earlier this offseason, I was advocating for the Mets to extend Jacob deGrom now, because I don't want to see deGrom pitch in another uniform. You look at the history of this franchise and you look at the retired numbers. None of them go and spend their entire career at the Mets. David Wright will be the first one. Jerry Koosman pitched with the Twins, the White Sox, and the Phillies. Tom Seaver was traded. Mike Piazza and Keith Hernandez were acquired by the Mets in the middle of their careers. Carlos Beltran, if he were to go into the Hall of Fame with the Mets cap, and if he were to get into the Mets Hall of Fame and get his jersey retired, all that good stuff, again, he did not spend his entire career at the Mets. He was brought into the organization. There's not a lot of guys that have done it. David Wright really is the one. So you look at Jacob deGrom as the next guy, and to me, it's vitally important for this franchise that they make sure they hang on to deGrom. They make sure that they keep this guy who has a great chance to go into Cooperstown in a Mets uniform for his entire career. This is a player that has indicated in the past that he wants to spend his entire career at the Mets, and I just hope they make that happen for him. Now, the question is, if it's not deGrom, Who is it going to be? Is it going to be Pete Alonso? That is the most obvious answer, but he's still very early on into his career. I'm going to talk about Pete and who else could potentially spend their entire career with the Mets in just a minute. Football might be over for the season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props, to where the next fire coach is going to land, BetOnline is the number one spot for all of your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. Bet online where the game starts. So if not Jacob deGrom, then who? Michael Conforto technically still has a chance to spend his entire career with the Mets, but I think he's gone. And I know I've seen some recent reporting indicating the Mets could still be in on Michael Conforto. Pat Ragazzo of Sports Illustrated did have a report recently that the Mets could still be interested in Chris Bryant or Michael Conforto, as they may not be done addressing their outfield. And as much as I love to see it, I'm just not buying the Conforto angle. Not only do I think that, everything he was sort of saying at the end of the season kind of indicated that he would be looking elsewhere. He did not see a reunion in place. I also think if you're a team in the Mets that has made every indication that you do not want to sign any player that has a qualifying offer attached because you are looking to hang on to your draft picks, are you really going to sign the player in Conforto to add to a position you've already addressed this offseason with Starling Marte and Mark Canha and miss out on the opportunity to get a good pick for him? I mean, there's been a lot made about the Mets having, 6 picks in the top 100. One of them would be from Michael Conforto signing elsewhere. So I don't really buy that. That takes Conforto off of the table when it comes to a player spending his entire career with the Mets. Then you're looking at Brandon Nimmo, who'll be a free agent next off season. Maybe the Mets do extend him, but we really don't know. All the injury concerns also make him a player that maybe doesn't fall in the same class as a David Wright or a Jacob deGrom to be, a Hall of Famer, or even a Mets Hall of Famer if he spends his entire career with the team. I guess if Nimmo were to get extended and go on to have 6 or 7 great seasons after this, he would end up falling closer into that class of being a Mets Hall of Famer. But I just don't know. I don't know if he's going to stay. I think the fact that they just signed Starling Marte makes it more likely that Nimmo could end up walking in the offseason. If he has a great year, Nimmo is going to hit the market, and he's now represented by Scott Boras. He wants to remain in center field for a reason because he's trying to boost that free agent value. This is a player that I think has his eyes squarely set on cashing in on a big contract. Not that the Mets couldn't be the team that gives him one, but I just don't know at this point if Nimmo will be a Met beyond the 2022 season. So what's that leave you with? Leaves you with Pete Alonso. And Alonso certainly fits the billing of the next David Wright, quote unquote, although they are different players, with Pete Alonso being more power oriented than Wright was, even at his best. But the thing about Pete Alonso is it's so early into his career, we really don't know what's going to happen here. And the other thing to note is that when it comes to players and the evolution of the franchise guy, I think what you have to pay attention to is the early contract extension. I think this is the way that we're going to begin to see these guys stick it out with one franchise for the majority, if not all of their career now. It's not going to be the guys that get close to free agency, because these guys that start to get close to free agency, like a Mookie Betts, get traded. You look at Wander Franco. The guy just got an 11-year contract this offseason. He still hasn't even played a full year of baseball yet at the big league level. You look at Fernando Tatis Jr., gets a 14-year deal. Ronald Acuna Jr. got an 8-year deal, but it's essentially a 10-year deal because there's 2 club options at the back end of it that are affordable for a player of his talents. So unless he falls off a cliff, those would be exercised. That's a decade-long contract. And then from there, maybe he gets another one with the Braves and he sticks it out. But then again, maybe he doesn't, because you see what they're doing now with Freddie Freeman, shockingly not looking to hang on to him. So I don't know. The way the game's changing, we really don't know. But I do believe that the future is going to be in signing these players to the extensions early to carry them into their mid or early to mid 30s. And then if you have a franchise guy, maybe you retain him and keep him in that uniform for their entire career. So for Pete Alonso, it's time to talk about an extension. And I've already done this on this show. I'll leave that as when you get to the end of the YouTube video. If you're watching there, you can find the video right there where I talk about a Pete Alonso contract extension. It'll play on the screen. If you're on the podcast feed, you scroll down, you can find a podcast I did probably a couple of months ago now where I talked about a Pete Alonso contract extension and what it could look like, what the dollar amount could be. I compared him to Joey Votto, and I'm trying to think of the other. I thought it was Freddie Freeman and the extension that Freeman got with the Braves and what a reasonable number would be because Pete Alonso debuted a little bit older. If you gave him a 10-year extension now, I mean, you'd be talking about a player that would likely spend his entire career at the Mets. And I think it would be smart to sign Pete earlier rather than later because the closer he gets to free agency, the more the incentive is for him to wait it out as his arbitration number kicks up. He doesn't have that same pressure of playing at the low number. He can see the jackpot or the money at the end of the rainbow there. You want to get a deal done sooner rather than later on Pete Alonso if you want to retain him. And to me, there is that significance in having the homegrown star that is just always part of your team. And now that we're at this point that Pete Alonso has been in the league for 3 years, I think it's pretty clear who he's going to be. I mean, in his worst season, which was 2020, the shortened campaign, he still had 16 home runs in that 60 game season, which, he would have been on pace for another 30, 40 home run year. You see what he did in 2019. You see what he did this past season. Pete Alonso is no doubt about it, power threat, and he's improved defensively. I think he'll grow even more as a leader as he gets deeper into his career. He is another guy that I really look at and say that is a Met, right? Pete Alonso bleeds blue and orange. He has done everything right when it comes to not only his play on the field, but what he said off the field, the way he has embraced the community, embraced being a New Yorker. So I look at Pete and Jacob deGrom as those two guys for the Mets right now. But the crazy thing is, if you look at the way the game's going, there's a good chance that we see Jacob deGrom in a Dodgers uniform at some point or Pete Alonso in a Red Sox jersey. There's a chance. And that's frustrating. And I just hope that now that Steve Cohen is in place as opposed to Wilpons, maybe some of that will change. Maybe the Zach Wheelers of the world won't end up on the Phillies because you have an owner that can pay the players that deserve to be paid. When it comes to the Mets right now, the two players who have, epitomized everything about being a Met, who deserve to be paid, who deserve to be valued, who deserve to be prioritized, it's Jacob deGrom first and foremost, no doubt about it. And not too far behind him, it's Pete Alonso. Hopefully, those will be the next forever Mets. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. On tomorrow's show, unless there's some breaking news like the end of a lockout to cover, we'll stick with Pete Alonso, and I'm going to preview his upcoming season, setting expectations for Pete Alonso in 2022. So make sure you tune into that. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you again for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, either tune in to Locked On MLB Prospects or Locked On MLB Bets, hosted by your boy Q and handicapping us by Lee Sterling. Locked On Bets is where you want to go for all your daily gambling needs. You can follow Locked On Bets wherever you get podcasts.